Hi friends, a very warm welcome to Skholar. My name is Akshaya and I shall be taking your medieval history portion of the UPSC syllabus. This is the lesson 4 of the medieval history series, and in this lesson we shall be talking about the phase 2. We are starting with the phase 2 of the early medieval period, and particularly in this lesson we are restricting ourselves to the North India, and we shall talk about the tripartite struggle that was going on, and we'll also talk about one of the key dynasties, that is the Pratiharas. But before we get into all this, let's try and take a quick recap of what we've covered so far. So we have done the phase 1 of the early medieval India, that is we have covered these 3 regions, the North India, the Deccan and the far south region. In the North India, we have spoken about the 3 key dynasties which were in play, which is the Pushyabhutis or the Vardhanas. And we did King Harsha in detail because he's an important ruler. We have done the other 2 dynasties, not as important, but to give you a more holistic picture. We had also spoken about the Maukhris and the Maitrakas. This was about the North India region. Then we covered the Deccan region, wherein we spoke about these 3 dynasties, Western Chalukyas, particularly most important king Pulakeshin II, Western Chalukyas of Badami, Eastern Chalukyas of Vengi, and the Chalukyas, the later Chalukyas of the Kalyani. This is about Deccan and North India. And lastly, in the last lecture, we spoke about the far south region, wherein we had spoken about the 4 dynasties, particularly talking about the Pallavas and the Pandavas, because they were the most important ones. So, and then again Kadambas in the Western Gangas, but not so much in detail because they are not as important as the first 2. So essentially, so far in the previous 3 lectures, we have covered the phase 1 of the early medieval India from around, which is the time spanning between around 600 to 750 AD. And starting this lecture, we are going to talk about the second phase essentially. So this is done. We are now starting with the second phase, which is 750 to the 1200 AD. But we are still in the early medieval phase, but the phase 2. Now, in the same fashion as we have covered the phase 1, we shall also be covering the phase 2, that is this time period from 750 to 1200 for all the regions, that is the North India, Deccan and the South region. In this lecture, we are starting with the North India region, and we are basically going to talk about the tripartite struggle which was going on. I'll just explain what was this struggle about, and also the 3 dynasties which were engaged in the tripartite. We'll do one of these dynasties in detail, which is the Pratiharas dynasties. So I hope you have understood what have we covered so far and what are we planning to cover today. So without any further ado, let's dive into what we are going to cover today. So tripartite struggle is the term which is often used by the historians to refer to this famous struggle which was going on between the 3 empires or the 3 major kingdoms for the city of Kannauj. Now, the term tripartite itself, you can understand that, it means 3 parties. There were 3 parties to the struggle, and which were those 3 parties? They were the Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas and the Palas. So now, why were they fighting for the city of Kannauj? They were fighting for the city of Kannauj because essentially this was lying in the Gangetic Valley, and this was supposedly a very prosperous and a very rich kingdom. But still, it would be prudent for us to understand in detail, points wise, why was this place of Kannauj so important. But before we get into that, let's try and take a look at the detailed location of the 3 dynasties, as in where were these 3 dynasties ruling from, and how were they converging and forming this Kannauj triangle. Now, Kannauj triangle is another term which is sometimes used by the historians to refer to this famous kind of a triangle which is formed between these 3 powers and fighting for the same spot. So if you look at the dynasty Gurjar Pratiharas, they were ruling in the western India, in the Rajasthan, in the Malwa region plateau, basically the Rajasthan and the south of Gujarat. You can see this region. This region you can see. This is your basically the influence, and this whole green one means that they at the max they have been until this whole region. So constantly they were fighting somebody. Sometimes Gujaras were until here, sometimes Pallavas at their peak were until here. So this was the Gujaras at their peak. Second dynasty that we had was of the Rashtrakutas, who were ruling from the Deccan region. Rashtrakutas at their peak were essentially almost until here. And then the third dynasty that we had was the Palas, which was ruling from the Bengal, the present day Bengal, and they were situated in the eastern part of the India. Now, if you look at one dynasty here, the other one here, and the third one here, they essentially form a sort of a triangle with Kannauj at its center. Kannauj is somewhere here. So this is what is the famous Kannauj triangle of the history, wherein there are three strong contenders fighting for the city of Kannauj. And this is this famous tripartite struggle that we started to talk of. Now, let's try and understand, as I said in the beginning, why was Kannauj so important? What is this big deal about Kannauj that everybody wanted to control the city of Kannauj? Now, first of all, we should remember from our previous lessons that Harsha had set up his capital in Kannauj. So, while Harsha was ruling in this region and Vardhanas were a strong power, and at its peak during Harsha's rule, Kannauj was the capital, and Kannauj essentially succeeded Patliputra, the ancient city of Patliputra, as this political center of the North India. So this was the first importance of the city of Kannauj, that it was the capital of Harsha, and it was therefore the political nerve center of the North India. And also because it was his capital in the past days, it was a very prosperous city, and it was a hub for the international economic activities and trade. Now, the next thing is that it was connected to the very important ancient Silk Road. Now, I'll just show you on the map here. This is the ancient Silk Road, and you can see on this one that the Kannauj lies on this track, the ancient Silk Road. Again, this was the route which was taken up by the traders and the merchants. So this was the second factor which was adding to the importance of the Kannauj for everyone to be contending to be ruling that city. Thirdly, as I said at the outset, that this was lying in the Gangetic plain, and it was drained by Ganga. So it was lying in that Doab region which was drained by the Ganges, and it had these really rich resources of the Gangetic valley. Now, rich resources because the fertile land, in those days the primary source of income for a state would be the tax. Even until today, tax is the main source of income. So taxation would primarily come from the agriculture, the kind of agriculture that was done, and a fertile land would naturally have more produce, therein more taxes and the higher income for the state. So this was a region which, if controlled by a certain empire, could make them richer by getting them more taxes by the people, right? Now, these are the 3 points. And the fourth point is the prestige. So you see, I said at the outset that Kannauj basically took over the Patliputra, the city of Patliputra, as this political nerve center of the North India, and it became this center of high prestige and might. It was a symbol of might for everyone in the North India. So whoever controlled the Kannauj was supposed as the sovereign in the North India region particularly. For instance, the kind of stature that King Harsha had during his times could be linked to it, because he was essentially ruling from Kannauj. So this was the fourth point, the prestige and the symbol of might associated with Kannauj. And lastly, when these 3 dynasties or the empires would fight amongst themselves, they would earn a large amount of war booty, which would further add to their revenue, and thus it would help them maintain a large army. So these are the key points. Primarily the location of Kannauj, lying on the Silk Road, uh, uh, hub for the international economic activities, trade and commerce, the kind of prestige and the status that it commanded from the times of Harsha. Then the fertile land, because it lied in the Gangetic Plain, the Doab region. So these are the most important factors which made Kannauj such an important city, and this is why the Palas, the Pratiharas, and the Rashtrakutas, all of these three dynasties were converging and they were vying for this city of Kannauj. So this is about the importance of Kannauj. Also, a little note here that they were also fighting for this control over the region of Gujarat and Malwa, because you see this was the region which gave them access to. So let's say if this is your India and somebody who's controlling Gujarat and this region, they would get access to the sea region essentially. And again, the access to coast or the seas would be very important for the foreign trade, essentially, specifically if the Arabs are coming for trade and etc. So this was another region, and we would see later that Pratiharas and Rashtrakutas, they fought over this Gujarat and Malwa region. So this was another thing, but most importantly, one word answer why tripartite struggle, then it is for Kannauj. Now, this was about the tripartite struggle, the Silk Road I had shown you, and I told you that Kannauj lied on this Silk Road. Now we are going to talk about these three dynasties one by one, starting with the first dynasty, which is the Pratiharas. Now, Pratiharas are sometimes also called as the Gurjara Pratiharas because they originated from this place, Gurjarasht, or the location where they were. This is this region. Yeah. So this is, or the southwest Rajasthan basically. So sometimes they are also called as the Gurjara Pratiharas, or the other name for the Pratiharas. What does this term essentially mean, the Pratihara term? It means the doorkeeper. So some historians claim that Pratiharas traced their lineage to the mighty god Lakshmana, who was kind of the doorkeeper for Lord Rama, and thus they called themselves as the doorkeeper. But just remember that Pratihara, the term means doorkeeper, and they were probably the local officials of the dynasties preceding them. But after the the dynasties before them, they started declining, which we have seen in the previous lectures, how the North India region, after specifically the death of Harsha, how things were, how the feudatory chiefs were rising up, and thus these local officials, they were able to carve out a space for themselves in this region of particularly Malwa, southwest Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now they say that this dynasty was probably founded by a Brahmin called Harichandra. Just remember this name. It was probably founded by a Brahmana named Harichandra. So probably the Pratiharas were Brahmins by caste. And the most important thing for which the Pratiharas are most noted is their role in containing the Arabs. So if you see in this map, you can see that Arabs had started coming in, and there were two branches of Arabs. There were the Arabs of Multan and Mansura. So they were trying to come in and invade, further deeper in India. But Pratiharas had this key role to play, that they made sure that Arabs were not able to get in further. So this is the most notable thing about the Gurjara Pratihara Empire. And it became a very prominent player in around 8th century during the reign of the Nagabhatta I. This was a very important Pratihara ruler. And now we shall take a look at the most important rulers one by one. So you have got, starting with the Nagabhatta I, Vatsaraja, Nagabhatta II, Mihir-Bhoj, Mahendrapal, Mahipal, Rajyapal, and Yashpal. Now, probably you would be a little bogged down by the number of rulers that we have here, but it's nothing to be worried about, because like I've said even earlier, we do not have to remember all of these rulers, and Just the most important ones that I've highlighted here, Nagabhatta and Mihir Bhoj. So probably something of a really important character I would highlight if at all there's a need to remember, but otherwise just remember Nagabhatta II and the ruler Mihir Bhoj, who were the most important rulers of this dynasty. Now we shall look at these rulers one by one, starting with Nagabhatta I. So he is known for checking the invasions of Arabs, and he offered a very successful resistance. So I said that there were two branches of Arabs who were trying to come in from, they were in Sindh already, the Arabs, and there were two branches in Multan and Mansoura. And after Qasim's attack, Muhammad bin Qasim, which we shall just deal with in the later lectures. So Qasim was the first Arab governor who tried and who invaded in India. After that, there were these two other Arabs general, Junaid and Tamim. You can remember their name. So Junaid and Tamim, they were also defeated by Nagabhatta I, and he made sure that they were not able to enter further inside India. Nagabhatta exercised his control over the regions of Malwa, Rajputana and Gujarat, but he was defeated by the Rashtrakuta king Dhruva. Now, I've said that they were also fighting for this region of Gujarat, Malwa, amongst these two. So they fought amongst themselves. He was able to control Malwa, Rajputana and Gujarat, but he was defeated by the Rashtrakuta king Dhruva, and he ruled from this place Avanti in the Malwa region. Avanti is the ancient name for Ujjain, the present modern city of Ujjain in modern Madhya Pradesh. So this is where he had his extent. He was ruling over Rajputana, Gujarat and the Malwa region, just to show you the extent of Nagabhatta I's empire. Now the next ruler that we have here is Vatsaraja. He extended the Nagabhatta's empire even further, and he shifted the capital to Kannauj. So he shifted the capital from Avanti to Kannauj, and this is when the tripartite struggle began. This tripartite struggle for Kannauj, because he shifted the capital to Kannauj, now everybody wants to control Kannauj. And he had this policy of expansion. So Nagabhatta I already had the substantial empire, but the successor Vatsaraja further expansionist policy. Thus he was in conflict with the Palas and the Rashtrakutas. These names you can avoid for now. You don't have to remember each and every ruler who were at conflict, but just remember these three dynasties who were in conflict with each other. And this struggle for Kannauj, it went on for almost around 300-350 years. This is the importance of Kannauj you can ascertain. Now comes this king that you should remember, Nagabhatta II. Nagabhatta II is important because it was under him that Pratiharas became the most important and the most powerful dynasty of North India. The struggle went on, the tripartite struggle went on, and he was able to defeat Dharmapala. Dharmapala, he basically defeated one of his vassals or one of his nominee ruler, Chakrayuddha, that Dharmapala had installed at Kannauj. After Dharmapala had won Kannauj, then he installed a ruler called, you can say, a nominee ruler called as Chakrayuddha. Then Nagabhatta II defeated Chakrayuddha, who was Dharmapala's nominee, but then he was himself defeated by the Govind III, who was the Rashtrakuta king. So you can see the kind of constant rivalry and the constant battle which is going on amongst these three dynasties. And then Nagabhatta II was succeeded by his son Ramabhadra, but he's not an important ruler. I haven't even put the name here because he ruled for a very brief period. One thing more that you can remember, that the famous Somnath temple that was rebuilt during the times of Nagabhatta II. So Nagabhatta II is an important ruler of the Pratiharas dynasty. First, because Pratiharas became the most powerful dynasty under him, he shifted the capital to, Vatsaraja shifted the capital to Kannauj, and under his reign, he defeated the Pala ruler Dharmapala, but he was himself defeated by Govind III, who was a Rashtrakuta king. Also, remember him for rebuilding the famous Somnath temple. Next that you have here is Mihir Bhoj. Mihir Bhoj is the most important, the most crucial. He's equivalent to the stature that Harsha had at a time. So you just as much as you remember Harsha, try to remember Mihir Bhoj also. Now Mihir Bhoj was the grandson of Nagabhatta II, and he had this long reign for almost around 46-48 years, and he is considered as the most powerful and the most successful ruler of the Pratiharas. Although in his initial years as the ruler, he was defeated by the Rashtrakutas, the Palas, and some other powers like the Kalachuris, etc. But he made a exemplar comeback, and he was able to defeat all of these forces, and he carved out a really strong and safe and a secure place for the Pratiharas. Also, his capital during his time, capital remained at Kannauj, and it was called as Mahodaya. Just remember this name, Mahodaya. This was the name for Kannauj. Now you should also try to recall here that I had spoken earlier that Kannauj was also called as Kanyakubj. This is another ancient name for Kannauj. So Kannauj, Kanyakubj, Mahodaya. It's one and the same thing. During the times of Bhoja, the king Mihir Bhoja, it was called as Mahodaya. Now remember that he is called as Mihir Bhoja so that you can distinguish him from a later ruler, Bhoja, who's another ruler which we'll study in the later lessons after the breakdown of Pratiharas. But just remember him as the Mihir Bhoja or the Bhoja of the Pratihara dynasty. Now also he was a devotee of the Lord Vishnu, and he took this title of Adi Varaha. Now Varaha, I'm sure you know, he is one of the incarnations of Lord Vishnu. Out of the 10 incarnations of Lord Vishnu, Varaha is one of the many incarnations, and after that incarnation or that avatar of Lord Vishnu, Mihir Bhoja took this title of Adi Varaha. He had inscribed this famous Gwalior inscription in which he has praised Nagabhatta II, who was his grandfather, and he has spoken about how he had won over his rivals and his enemies. So Gwalior inscription, again you can remember, it is attributed to Mihir Bhoj. And there are certain travelers from whose accounts we know of these rulers and how were the society and the polity of those times. So you have these two accounts here. You have the account of Suleiman and you have the account of Al-Masudi. So Suleiman has praised King Bhoja for his great military power and the riches of the empire, and he's also praised his administration because he said that the empire was safe and the roads were safe for travelers, etc. Secondly, Al-Masudi. Now remember this traveler Masudi, because he calls the kingdom as the empire of Juzru. Now probably this is a mispronunciation for Gujara, and he calls the Gujar empire as the empire of Juzru, and he talks about how huge this expanse was. He says some 2000 kilometers in length and breadth, which could be an exaggeration, but just to give you an idea that the Pratiharas empire was indeed a mighty one. We can also refer to the account of this Arab traveler Al-Masudi, who calls the empire of Gujara as the empire of Juzru. Secondly, he calls Bhoja as King Baura. Baura, again, it could be a mispronunciation for Adi Varaha. These facts you should try to remember, who's referred to as the King Baura in history. So it is Adi Varaha or the King Bhoja, and whose empire is referred to as King Juzru. These kind of questions, they could be asked because again and again I have repeated that terms, specifically the kind of terms which are being used in history, they are a favorite with UPSC. So try to remember the titles of the kings, the specific terms of the officials, and certain other terms which were used in those times. These are a favorite with UPSC and they could be asked. So I'll repeat again. Al-Masudi calls the kingdom as the empire of Juzru, and he calls the King Bhoja as the King Baura. He also praises the cavalry of Pratiharas and he calls it the best in India. So at the time of King Bhoja, when Al-Masudi had visited, remember that Pratiharas cavalry was the best. Essentially, it meant that Pratiharas were the strongest empire during the times of King Bhoja, Mihir Bhoja. So now we've come to his successor Mahendrapala. Even under this king Mahendrapala, Pratihara, they remained a very strong empire, and they reached almost until the west of the border of Sindh. You can see how much it was expanding even further west to the border of Sindh. So in Sindh you had the Arabs, two branches that I have spoken of. It reached until there, east to Bengal. So it almost reached until the Palas Empire, and north to the Himalayas, and south past the river. So you can see the kind of the kind of expansion that Mahendrapala had done to the Pratihara's empire, and the empire became almost as mighty that it could be compared to that of the Gupta Empire. So Guptas, we have done in our ancient history how mighty an empire it was. It became comparable to something of that kind under the reign of King Mahendrapala. And because of all these military conquests and victories, he took the title of Maharaj Adiraj of Aryavarth, the great king of the kings of the North India. Maharaj Adiraj of Aryavarth. So Mahendrapala, the further expansion of the empire continued. Now Mahendrapala is also known for having this poet Rajasekhara at his court, and he was also at the court of his son, which we'll just see. But this Sanskrit poet Rajasekhara, famous name, and his famous works Kavya Mimamsa and Karpur Manjari. So you can remember Kavya Mimamsa is basically a guide for poets as to how Kavya Mimamsa, the term itself means a practical guide for the poetry. So how to write a good poetry. If let's say the UPSC asks which work in the ancient or the in the Indian historical literature talks about the practical guide for writing a good poetry, just remember it's Kavya Mimamsa, and it is attributed to the poet Rajasekhara, who lived at the court of Mahendrapala, right? And his other famous works are Karpur Manjari and Vidashala. Just remember that from the ancient and the medieval portion of your history syllabus particularly, UPSC asks generally more questions, not so much on the political history and the kings, etc., but more about the cultural part of those times. You know, how the literature, how the architecture, the music, etc. of the times were. So we will particularly focus on those parts in the course as we progress, but also try to keep in mind while you are preparing your history that for the ancient and for the medieval, the socio-cultural part becomes more important than the political history part. We will be covering the political history part as well, so as to give you this entire holistic picture, but the more important part is the socio-cultural part, right? Great. So we were talking about this poet Rajasekhara and his three famous works, who lived at the court of Mahendrapala. Also remember that Mahendrapala, although he was a great conqueror, but he fought with the king of Kashmir, the Utpals basically, and he had lost to them, and he even had to secede some part of the territories in Punjab which were won by his father Bhoja, and he had to yield that territory to that ruler of Kashmir. So just remember as a fact that Mahendrapala was the Pratihara who lost to the king of Kashmir. Next that you have is his son Mahipal, who was defeated by this king Rudra, and Rudra III completely devastated the city of Kannauj. This you can see later also. We'll see that another 100 years and then Gujar Pratiharas as a kingdom, they will be extinguished. So this is first such failure, or you can say of the dynasty, wherein they faced this complete devastation at the hands of Rashtrakuta Rudra III, who devastated the city of Kannauj. And Gujarat region from the Pratiharas is passed into the hands of Rashtrakuta in this period under Mahipala. So you can see he was probably not that strong a ruler as his predecessors Mihir Bhoj and Mahendrapala were. Rajasekhara, the same Sanskrit poet, he continued to live at his court too. But remember his three works, please: Kavya Mimamsa, Karpur Manjari, and Vidashala. Just remember these three names. Right. Now we have just come to the end of these rulers, and we have the king Rajyapala and the king Yashpala here. Krishna III was another Rashtrakuta king, and starting from the times of Mahipala, you can see that kind of a decline had started off. And again, during the times of Rajyapala, this king Krishna III, Rashtrakuta king Krishna III, he again defeated the Pratihara rulers, and Rajyapala was the ruler at that time. So again, they were defeated at that time. Also, the Arabs are becoming more and more desperate to get inside, and after Qasim and Junaid and Tamim, now by this time Ghazni, the Mahmud of Ghazni, we'll see in the later periods, in the later lessons as well. But if you remember and if you know that Mahmud of Ghazni had invaded India around he had made several raids to India, and one of those raids was during the Rajyapala reign, and Rajyapala had fled from the field, from the battlefield. And this is, you can compare it to the times when Nagabhatta II and Vatsaraju I were essentially containing the Arabs, and now Arabs have started to assert more than the Pratiharas. So it's an indication of the decline of the Pratiharas and a increasingly growing power of the Arabs. So this was another thing you can remember. Who was the Pratihara ruler when Ghazni had invaded? Rajyapala, and Rajyapala had invaded from the had fled from the battlefield. Last that I have put here is the ruler Yashpala. He was the last ruler of the Pratihara dynasty, and essentially by his rule it had come to an end, and there were succession disputes, and already there was political instability, and finally by around 1090 another feudal chiefs of the Pratiharas, Gadavalas or Gadvalas, different names in different history books you can find, they had conquered Kannauj, and some books even claim that the Kalachuris had Kannauj. But just remember that by 1090 AD or 1090 CE, the Pratiharas were completely extinguished from the political map of India. Essentially, we will see a dedicated slide on the decline later, but before that, let's talk about the politico-social life of those times. How was the administration, etc. So first of all, in the Pratihara rules, there were several samans. Samans, you can understand as the feudal chiefs of the Pratiharas, and they were appointed by the king. So the samans, in their own internal affairs sphere, they were autonomous, but they were obligated to give military help to the king wherever they were called upon to do so. So a small little internal kingdoms within the Pratiharas, you can say fold, but they were autonomous to the extent of internal affairs, but whenever called for the military help, they were bound to do that, right? So this is the first feature. And of course, it was a monarchy, so king was the most important, and there was a council of ministers, whose advice was sought by the king. But we do not really have any historical documented evidence of the Mantri Parishad. There are certain evidences, indirect references, which suggest there was probably a council of ministers, because essentially the kind of administration and the setup that was going on during the times of Guptas and Vardhanas, etc., that only continued, and there was probably king and his council of ministers to assist him, but we do not really have any strong evidences to support. Also, what was the kind of decentralization that was happening? So the whole empire was broken further into the bhuktis or the provinces, right? And then these were led by the uparikas, the province governor, then further breaking down into the mandalas or the vishyas, and they were led by the vishyapatis. These terms, again, as I keep saying again and again, terms are very important for your history portion. Who were the vishyas, who were the vishyapatis, right? So they can ask you what their vishyapatis to do with the army function or the administration. So they were to do with the revenue collection administration function for the mandalas or the sub-province level or the district level, sorry. And then there was a group of villages, and finally under the group of villages there was each of those villages wherein village was the unit of the administration. So each village in the Pratihara kingdom was the, this is very similar to what was happening in the times of Guptas and Harsha. And village headman was held by Gram Mahajana or Gram Mahatara, right? Something like a panchayat. Village elders were helping the village headman. This is something that was there at the times of Pratiharas, and they had a law and order officer who was called as the Koshtapala or the Kotwal. Just remember these terms, they are important from the prelims perspective. Now let's take a look at what was the economy of the Pratiharas kingdom like. So it was mainly of agrarian nature. I spoke that in those times agriculture and produce was the main support for the economy. So the economy was mainly of the agrarian nature, and the tax was levied on the agriculture production. This was the main source of revenue for the government. This is why the whole fight for the fertile lands in and around the Doab region, and particularly the prosperity of Kannauj. Copper coins were the most prevalent and the major form of the medium of exchange which were issued by the Pratiharas. So these are the copper coins are the ones which have been found by the archaeologists later. They've been attributed to the Pratiharas time. Now, another thing notable from this time period is the temple architecture of the Gujar Pratiharas dynasty, and the kind of architecture that they developed later culminated into the Maru Gujara kind of the architecture. Certain notable examples of this kind of architecture would be Teli Ka Mandir, which was built by Mihir. This is your Teli Ka Mandir, and I put a picture here. And there is a Baroli temples complex, Ghateshwara Mahadev temple attributed to Lord Shiva, and then there is a Bhateshwar Hindu temple again in Madhya Pradesh. So the region around where the Pratiharas generally rule, most of these temples are found in and around Madhya Pradesh. They were built by one or the other Pratihara ruler, right? So temple architecture is another important part of the Pratiharas dynasty. Try remembering these names. They could ask you Teli Ka Mandir is attributed to, and they could give you 4 temple names and the 4 dynasties or the ruler's name. So as we spoke of, remember in case of Chalukyas, Aihole, Badami, etc. Similarly, in case of Pratiharas, Teli Ka Mandir, Baroli, Bhateshwar, etc. Right? So try remembering these important, if not all of them, at least few of them, so that you can do some intelligent elimination, etc. in your prelims paper. So this has brought us to the end of the details that we were to study of the Pratiharas. Now let's talk about how did such a mighty and strong empire finally came to a decline, and what and where it went wrong. I mean, you saw in the previous slides that we did have some really strong rulers, as in we had Nagabhatta II, we had Mihir Bhoja, and we had Mahendrapala. But after Mahendrapala, let's just go back to, after Mahendrapala, I told you that his successor, since Mahipala, I said, the kings were not as strong, and these successive reigns of incapable rulers essentially let their feudatories rise in power. So if there's a strong center, then the feudatories are subsided, they are subdued, and they are under control. But as the center starts weakening, something that you see even in today's time, if at the center we don't have a strong ruler or a strong king, then the smaller states would start asserting their power, and they would all start vying for independence. Something that you saw even in the times of the Guptas, even after the death of Harsha, and now again after the strong Pratiharas ruler died and the incapable or the less strong ones came into power, the feudatories started rising, right? And on top of that, they had these major losses to the Rashtrakuta king Indra III and Krishna III, who had even came and sacked the city of Kannauj, right? So they took away the wealth and booty, a lot of money from the Pratiharas kingdom, and further weakening the Pratiharas empire. So the first reason, successive reigns of incapable rulers in Pratiharas, and the rise of the feudatory, the rising influence of the feudatories. Secondly, The raid of the Ghaznavids. So I spoke about that Mahmud of Ghazni made successive raids, multiple raids to India, and then during the reign of Rajapala, even Rajapala fled the battlefield. It was, Ghazni had come in with so much might. So this was again the second important factor which led to the wiping off of the Pratihara. So first, incapable ruler, feudatories started assaulting, and then the successive raids of the Ghaznavids. Ghaznavids were constantly vying. So from here, they were constantly trying to get inside, and Pratiharas were the doorkeepers, or you can say Pratiharas were the ones who were trying to control or check the further inside invasions of Ghaznavids. But beyond a point, when they had weak rulers, essentially Pratiharas themselves gave in and they were wiped off, right? So this is the second point. And lastly, after the Pratiharas declined, then of course we saw the rise of these all were their feudatories. During the times of strong Pratiharas, the Chauhans, Chalukyas, Paramaras, Chandelas, Kalachut, all of these had at one point been the feudatory chiefs of, the vassal chiefs or the feudatory chiefs of the Pratiharas. But when the Pratiharas became weak, they started rising their influence, and they all broke away into small kingdoms, which we shall study in the later lectures. But this is how essentially the Pratiharas came to a decline. So far, I'll just quickly recap the whole thing. We spoke about the tripartite struggle, wherein we spoke about the three dynasties, the Pratiharas, the Palas, and the Rashtrakutas, who were fighting for the city of Kannauj. We talked about the importance of the city of Kannauj. Why was it important? It was lying on the ancient Silk Road. It was a rich city because it was the erstwhile capital of King Harsha. Then it was a symbol of might and prestige. So that was about the city of Kannauj. And why was it important? The three dynasties were fighting for it. The three dynasties, out of these three dynasties, we'll study, I said, all of these three in detail. Then we talked about the Pratiharas in detail. We looked at how they came into power, the region that they were ruling. We spoke about their most important kings. Particularly, I requested you to please remember Nagabhatta II. More specifically, remember Mihir Bhoj. Definitely remember Mihir Bhoj, and remember Mahendrapal and the kind of conquest. Then we also spoke about their political social life, the system of administration, the economy, and we also spoke about the kind of temple architecture, and I gave some important names of the temples, etc., that they had built. And I also spoke about for the literature part, I spoke about the poet Rajashekhara, who was at the court of Mahendrapal and his son Mahipal. So this is essentially what we spoke about in this lesson. But overall, now let's take a look at what all have we covered so far in our medieval history series, that until this lesson, that is the lesson 4. So we started off with the phase 1 of the early medieval India, wherein we covered the North India, the Deccan and far south. For the Deccan, the three Chalukyas and Pallavas, etc., and this was for the north. So all this we covered, and then in this lecture we covered the Pratiharas. So the next lecture will look at the Palas, and then the succeeding lectures will look at the Rashtrakutas, etc. But for today, that's all we have, and thank you for watching. And for more such videos for your UPSC preparation, please log on to thescholar.com. Thank you.